mini seminar will be about our colleagues in prison currently in Turkey now. And my colleague, Laboskur, President of Stockholm Center for Freedom, will join me today. Yes, we are starting.
Let me give you some introductory points. The press freedom in Turkey is actually far worse than you think. Is the world worst jailer of the journalists in Turkey. We're going to give you the figures. 255 journalists, which is almost unbelievable figure, are behind bars in Turkey, and they are not even convicted. And most of them, they are not even indicted yet. So they don't even know what kind of charges they're going to be facing, or what kind of evidence, if any, the government has against them. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And my colleague Levent has some personal experience in jail, and he used smuggling routes to make it here. He was actually a chief editor of a national daily in Turkey, very, very popular one. He was managing the newspaper until the government came down and shut the newspaper and put him in the jail. And he had to flee Turkey through illegal migration routes that he has been covering actually 2 years ago with the Syrian, Iranian, Iraqi refugees. So he became a refugee himself. So he's going to talk about that. Who doesn't have, what's going on, who doesn't have an idea how terrible the situation in Turkey. Maybe we'll start with my poster. That's going to be very, very interesting, I suppose. This is a wanted poster. Yeah, I'm sure you have seen in the Wild West movies. That's my picture and that's my name. It says is a wanted on charges of terrorism, and my picture is all over the Turkish news media outlets as a traitor, working for the intelligence, all kind of fabricated charges the government brings against the journalists. I'm only one of those examples of so many,
that's
hundreds of them.
Produced by State News Agency, right?
Yes, and this is actually like this one, designed, printed, and published by the government news agency, and distributed across the world and across Turkey. So they're trying to hunt us down because we are critical of the Turkish government on what issues is basically corruption in multi-billion dollars, especially President Erdogan and his associates, family members. And another issue that you're going to see in all these jailed journalists, the ones that cover the Turkish government aiding and abetting the radical armed jihadist groups in Syria and Iraq. Those are the guys investigating, top-notch journalists who wrote, many stories on this subject. They are behind bars for writing and exposing this, clandestine business run by the Turkish intelligence, sanctioned by the government. So that is not a random. The government is actually going after critical, independent, or opposition journalists. So let me give you the floor to you. It's going to have a couple of slides. If we have time, maybe we can have a discussion, question, so we can have some, exchange.
Before sharing some figures about the press freedom in Turkey, as you said, I will talk a little about my personal story. I'm a journalist in exile in Sweden. I live in here for a year. I live in Stockholm, and I'll give it very short about my story. This is our newspaper, and we are celebrating our first anniversary. That was in April last year. All our colleagues and friends, and those were the days we were happy there.
This is before the crackdown, right? You are cutting the cake.
Yeah, that's in April.
Having party.
Yeah. Yes, I was the one cutting the cake. And then, as you're all aware, there's a coup attempt in Turkey last year in July. This is our headline about the coup. In Turkish we say no to coup, no return from democracy. This is our stance against the coup d'etat.
So you oppose, the editorial line, you actually oppose the military coup attempt. Yeah.
Exactly. But as a journalist, there were some question marks in the coup attempt. And as we know, an informant, informed authorities 6 or 8 hours ago that there would be a coup attempt in the evening. So we asked this question. You were aware, you did nothing to prevent it, and after this headline, look what has happened. Police raided our office, and Now I'm the one with blue t-shirt. I was detained.
So,
Unfortunately.
so the guys in the back is the plainclothes police officer
it's
taking you to the
police.
jail.
Yeah, now they're taking me. This is police vehicle. The video footage is not good. I think this because.
Did you know the
my
charge
friends-
at the time?
No, just questioning the content. I'm the one. Yeah. I said one day in detention cell. That was terrible, but luckily I was released, and I didn't expect such a thing. That I got surprised one day we are releasing here. I really, but one of my friends told me that they will detain you again, so don't go home. So I didn't go my home. I hid in a friend's flat for 2 days. As expected, the police raided my home this time, 4 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't home, my wife and kids were at home. They got very afraid, 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I decided to flee the country because it isn't safe anymore. So actually, told in the beginning, I covered and edited many news about human traffickers, but this time I paid money to them to flee my country. And I crossed the river. There is a river between Greece and Turkey, very small, tiny river in the summertime, but in the wintertime it's so dangerous.
You couldn't
People die.
travel on your passport, right?
No, my passport is cancelled.
They will detain at the airport if you go there.
Exactly. And this is a photo taken from the Greece border. The grass dried yellow is Greece, the other side with green and the trees is Turkey. This is my last look to my country 1 year ago. Now we are in Greece.
So that's the last look you have
Last look. This is
for
my last
Turkey.
look to the country. Yeah. Now, after my short story, thank you for listening. We will give you some figures. Well, freedom of the press in Turkey, this is our motto. Yes, you are aware that there are some failures, there are some drawbacks in Turkey. Yeah, there's a totalitarian leader, but the real situation, the real picture is far worse than you can think. There are 255 journalists in prison right now. 230 arrested and 25 convicted. We are talking about 255 journalists. This is very, very huge number. Now you will see why it is very huge. We will share you some data comparing with other countries. Let's start it. This is the figures jail journalists in the world. The red one is Turkey. Sorry, I will start it.
So let me ask you this: if you combine all the rest of the notorious countries like China, Iran, Eritrea, the Turkey still comes top of that.
Of course.
Maybe
Of course.
multiplies actually.
Turkey, the one country only, jails more journalists than the whole world does. Only Turkey, as you see the figures. And we always say this, these are not numbers, these are people. We are talking about fathers, wives, mothers, husbands.
Well, that is the reason actually we decided to set it up, this center, Stockholm Center for Freedom. I mean, we are professional journalists who have been covering many issues for years, but we never done the advocacy stuff or the human rights, defender stuff before. But you can call it as a guild of the survivors, because so many of our friends couldn't make it, still back in jail. So we try to, keep their names, track their cases, how their families are doing, so raise awareness on the plight of the jailed journalists.
Maybe we will talk about this gentleman, these two gentlemen. These two gentlemen are columnists in Turkey. The one with blue t-shirt is about 80 years old. As you notice, he was handcuffed at the back, and he's 80 years old and handcuffed at the back. Also the other guy. These are very prominent journalists of Turkey. And
this is
about
he's actually professor, right? Professor of political science, Şahin Alpay. He lived in Sweden for many years. When a while back there was a military coup in 1980, he had to flee. He's coming from the center left background, and he lived in Sweden for some time, and he went back to Turkey, and he is very prominent figure, very prominent journalist. And he has been in jail how many days? Over a year now?
More than a year.
More than a year he's been jailed.
At least 400 days. At
Yeah.
least.
And then other guy as well.
Yes, what are the charges? What the Turkish government claiming that these journalists are terrorists? These are the charges. Membership in a terrorist organization, spreading terrorist propaganda, attempting to overthrow the government, and espionage. These are very harsh charges. And so let's look at the evidence. What does government have in order to sue people?
Well, it sounds to me like very classical charges that you will find any authoritarian or dictatorship. Yeah.
Yeah, what are the evidences? Let's look at this. Tweets, retweets, books, columns, bank accounts, subscription to a critical daily. There are some journalists who were being sued by being a subscription to the newspaper he's working for. And how absurd is it?
Yeah, that's, I mean, as part of our tracking, task, we look at the indictments and the legal documents. What kind of charges they are facing, what kind of evidence the government, if any, have against them, because these are very serious charges. I mean, terrorism, coup plotting, espionage. You have to have some, violence, arms, bombs as such to be able to charge these people. But in the indictments that the government actually filed, there is none, except these, tweets. Most of the time, that's what we see actually, tweets or retweets, and what they have been writing in the past, or books they have written before, bank accounts, belonging to some critical groups.
Would you say a few words on canceling cable TV subscription? Would you say a few words on the last one?
Well, that's very absurd. I mean, the canceling the cable pay TV subscription. What we saw in Turkey 2 years back is a major cable company under the indirect control of the government. They started kicking out the broadcast network from the critical media outlets. So all of a sudden they dropped from the lineup. What was happening at the time, the main opposition party of Turkey and other critical groups, they decided to boycott the cable company for dropping the networks that's critical of the government. So now, 2 years later, the government is claiming that those people who canceled their subscription to the cable TV because of this act on the government is considered as an evidence of the terrorism and evidence of the crime. Do you actually see this in the official indictments, in the legal documents?
Well, this is another figure about what's happened after the coup attempt. 91% of people, journalists in prison, are jailed after the coup attempt. That's a very huge number. That shows what really happened after the coup attempt.
Well, actually, coup attempt is what we believe. We actually did a very comprehensive study with our colleagues. You can find the copy of the reports in the back on the table. It's completely fabricated as a stage, as a false flag operation by the Turkish government to set up the opposition for a mass persecution. So that's why we see the crackdown. Using the failed coup attempt as a pretext to railroad the critical media or human rights defenders, the civil society, the business groups, association and foundation as well. So that is a false flag operation in our opinion. We have a lot of evidence to prove that in our document, almost 200 pages. He mentioned before the last edition of his newspaper, the headline, he said, no to the coup. So his editorial line in the Turkish media is actually very much opposed to the coup, but he is facing charges on the coup plotting. So he's not siding with the coup plotters, but the charges is, ridiculously is blaming, on the side of the plotters.
This is another important figure. 187 media outlets shut down. Assume that your favorite newspaper, your favorite radio station, your favorite TV channel shut down by your government. After closed down, the Express and Lagaz Militaire or SVT shut down. Assume this. These were very prominent and very popular newspapers, radio stations and TV stations. 187.
From different critical groups, from Kurdish political movement, from the Gulen movement, from leftist dailies, And these are not shut down by the, the legal cases, by the way. Under the emergency rule, the simple executive decision by the government, publicizing the official gazette, they simply decided to shut down without any effective either administrative or the legal investigation.
There we have some pictures about this media struggle, and you see the police on the left. The other side are our friends called the journalists. They are defending their newspaper.
So this is actually way before the failed coup attempt. So what we see in Turkey actually speed up the process after the coup attempt. So the situation was already bad before the coup, and this is actually the third largest media group in Turkey that had two networks, two national broadcasting stations, two print media and one radio station. It was the third largest one month before the failed coup attempt, and the government just fabricated a legal case, and they decided to seize the media outlet. And this is the can you go back? So this is how they send the police to raid the media outlet so they can take over and turn into government propagandist media outlet.
It was the largest newspaper of Turkey. I worked for about 10 years, and it's unlawfully seized by the government. And the government appointed trustees in order to run the newspaper. And overnight, the editorial policy of the newspaper became pro-government. From critical to government, became a pro-government propaganda outlet.
So this is the second one that we saw before the failed coup attempt. Again on March 2016, it's Zaman called. They have a lot of publication in the group. But it was very critical of the government on the corruption and arming a jihadist group in Syria. So the government wanted to shut down, and they took over the newspaper. It was the largest, best-selling newspaper in Turkey, with 1.2 million copies at its peak one time. But maybe I can add a positive news to this terrible story. Within a week, after the government seized the newspaper and fired all the editors, chief editors, turned the newspaper into a government mouthpiece, our readers deserted the newspaper. The circulation dropped to 4,000 within a week. So that is the only positive story that we recall from this terrible moments. 400 riot police officers ransacking the editorial rooms with all the riots cheer as such. And these are the readers. Actually, we didn't want them to come to our newspaper building to protest because we didn't want to put them in a harm's way. But they showed up anyway, to show solidarity.
And the government didn't allow peaceful gatherings. And the boy with red shirt is our friend. He's a photographer, but he stops photographing and helping the wounded. Last year, this is the figure of the last year, 839 journalists appeared before judges. Whatever the reason is, all around Turkey, 839 journalists charged. It's a huge number. And this is very weird. Government is canceling your press card and then saying that the people in prison are not journalists because they don't have press cards. Before jailing, canceling press cards, and it's a very usual method used by the government when the international watchdogs or international organizations voice concern over the journalists, and the government replies there is no journalists in prison because they don't have press cards. And who's canceling press cards? Government itself. It's very tricky. And this is not only in Turkey. Some of our friends' assets were seized, confiscated. Your home, your car, or what do you have, your bank account are frozen by the government. These people can't work, and how will they survive?
Well, that's another form of the punishment that we see in Turkey as part of the intimidation campaign. They are not just going after you by jailing or prosecuting you, filing charges. They also seize your assets. You cannot sell your house, you cannot sell your car to support your family, basically, although the legal investigation or the trial phase is still going on. This is quite unprecedented because you need to have a full conviction you need to finalize all the proceeding before you can actually move and seize somebody's assets. And these are the laws actually promulgated before to seize the assets of the terrorists or the money launderers or the gangs as such. But they are using these laws against the journalists. So if you write critically of the government, you not only lose your freedom, but you can also lose your assets, your cash in the bank got tied up, so you cannot support your family. So that is, they don't need money. The government doesn't need that, but it's an intimidation. So you don't keep writing, you just become silent. That's a form of the intimidation.
So the last 3 minutes, and this is the figure of journalists wanted. This is our best knowledge. It's not the accurate number. This is what we know about 135 journalists still wanted by the government. And as you see, it's like Western cowboy films. The government publishing such posters. You're the guy, the other terrorist is over there.
He's on the wanted poster, yeah.
This is what Turkish government
He's
dealing
also a
with.
very journalist journalist in Turkey. He ran a national English daily for many years. He was assigned in overseas for many years, covering different issues. But he is now on a wanted poster, and that's kind of also is a part of intimidation, because our concern is, he is safe here in Sweden or others in other countries, but they see this wanted poster and it may lead, a vigilante violence by the people who feel very sympathetic towards the Turkish government. So that's another concern for many people who live in exile. By the way, this 135 figure is not included 255. So if the Turkish government somehow managed to find these 135 people who are wanted on the fabricated charges, the number of the jailed journalists is going to be way higher.
Well, thank you very much for listening to us. We are on our time, but if you have any questions, we are here. We will be pleased to answer your questions. But our seminar is over because we are.
I think we have like 9 minutes. No? 3 more minutes. Well, maybe it's not just about the Turkish journalists, by the way, because the Turkish journalists is pretty much intimidated. Some of them are able to write outside of Turkey. The ones still in Turkey, working for small media outlets, very limited reach to the Turkish audience. Now, most of the coverage we see on the fact-based investigative journalists on the foreign media, foreign reporters. So the government also started going after the foreign journalists who are either assigned in Turkey as a bureau chief or just going to Turkey to cover some specific subject, on a very short period of time. So we see some of the detention and the jailing of the foreign journalists from the United States, from France, from Italy, from Germany. There's actually German journalists behind bars right now. So the intimidation campaign is also escalated to include the foreign journalists. I know in my experience, for example, sometimes I get a call from international media outlets to write on a specific subject because they don't want their own reporters based in Turkey, in Istanbul or Ankara. They don't want to put them on a jeopardy. It may be a very sensitive subject, so they don't want them to write. They don't want to put them in harm's way. Instead, they are asking, like freelancer me, to write on sensitive subjects. So this is how terrible it is, and we want you to spread the word, put some pressure, and name and shame the Turkish government, and hopefully we can create some, critical pressure threshold, and hopefully we secure release of some of these guys. Even a little things can help out. So we'll be around if you need, any questions, if you want to know more. We have, copies of our reports in the table. Thank you very much for your time and listening to us. Truly appreciate it. All the best.